The 2024 F1 silly season was ridiculous. 20 drivers entered the Formula 1 grid last season, 10 seats have been swapped, 6 drivers have been fired, and that means 8 of the 10 teams have a new driver pairing going into 2025. But which team has the best duo in their seats, and which team has lost out the most after the changes? The impossible question to answer here is what makes a good driver lineup? Is it experience, talent, teamwork? There are a lot of factors at play, considering an F1 team only consists of 2 drivers. But I wanted to find out what most Formula 1 fans thought about the final 2025 grid. So I surveyed over 1,000 F1 fans and got them to rank each driver pairing from the best to the worst. Let's go through the results. With over 60% of the vote, Ferrari came out as the clear winners when it came to the best driver lineup on the 2025 grid. And I can understand why, now that Lewis Hamilton is joining Charles Leclerc. This duo has almost everything you could ask for in a driver pairing. Charles was, for me, the second best driver throughout the 2025 season. He was incredibly consistent, 21 top 5 finishes last season, and he can definitely blame Ferrari for that mid-season dip in form when they got their floor upgrade wrong after Spain. Because when Ferrari did get things right, Leclerc put in some breathtaking drives. I still don't 100% understand how he managed to keep those tyres so clean to get that win in Monza. When you add in the fact that he's probably the best qualifier on the entire grid, he's the only driver that's been able to go toe-to-toe with Verstappen in head-to-head battles during this regulation cycle, and he's still improving each season, you have yourself a driver who is surely ready to win a world championship, alongside a driver who already has 7 of them. Although Lewis did have a very tough 2024 where he wasn't particularly happy inside of his Mercedes car, the move to Ferrari and the new challenges that will bring should re-energize Lewis and bring back a little bit of the spark that does feel like it's been missing over the past couple of seasons. I think considering the experience that he has driving so many different generations of Formula 1 car at this point and being pretty quick in almost all of them, I can't see it taking too long for Hamilton to adapt to the SF25. And if he is able to extract pace from the Ferrari car from the outset, he should have a very exciting season. However, that does lead to the one worry that I do have with this duo. Looking back over the past couple of campaigns, there were quite a few times where Charles and Carlos found themselves on the same piece of track, and Ferrari weren't the best at dealing with those two going head to head. Now that you're replacing Carlos with Lewis, I think the hierarchy at Ferrari is even more complicated. There is no way that Leclerc or Hamilton is going to play second driver to the other. If Ferrari are out and out the quickest car, then it might not matter too much, as it would just be those two going for the championship against one another. But if McLaren or Red Bull are still in the mix as well, I do worry that Charles and Lewis might end up costing each other points and allowing those other teams to take advantage of that. Second place went to McLaren's 2025 driver lineup of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, with a third of you guys who voted actually voting this as the best driver pairing on the grid. I suppose there's a reason that they were one of the few teams who didn't get involved in the driver market madness last year. McLaren have found themselves 2 very strong, consistent drivers who are coming off the back of a Constructors' Championship win, but also they have 2 drivers who still feel like they can get better. Norris managed to get his first wins last year, as well as his first taste of an almost title fight, and at times you could tell it was Norris's first time being properly near the front, losing positions at the start of races, the team mismanaging a few of their strategies, and the battles with Max where Verstappen used his experience and knowledge to just stretch the regulations to their limits, but also cost Lando Norris points. It was a season in which Lando will have learned a lot, and in 2025 he needs to use all of that new knowledge and be able to apply it so that he can actually take advantage of when his competitors are in difficult situations and put himself properly in the title fight this year. Whereas Piastri is coming into only his 3rd season in the sport, but is already one of the most highly rated drivers on track. Also managed a couple of wins last year, but even more than Lando, Oscar needs to work on his consistency. He started the season okay, and there was a middle stint of the season between Austria and Singapore where Piastri looked to be the most informed driver on the grid, before then dropping off again towards the end of the season. If he can find that form that he had for that middle 8 race stint last year and be near that level for an entire season, this McLaren driver pair could easily be our title fight in 2025. The papaya rules were controversial last year. Imagine how controversial it might be this year. It's similar to what I said about Ferrari. The only downside of having a driver lineup this strong is that you hope they don't get in the way of each other and end up actually helping out their competitors. We have seen the two McLarens work together as a team. We've also seen them be not so helpful when team orders have been put in place. All I can say for now is that a title battle between Lando, Oscar, Lewis and Charles, McLaren versus Ferrari, would be explosive. Red Bull were ranked third more often than not, with just over half of all the surveys having the current Drivers' World Championship winning team below Ferrari and McLaren as they were in the Constructors' Championship last season. I think Max Verstappen, as the Drivers' Championship suggests, is still the best driver on the grid. Coming off the back of 4 championships in a row, all of them won in very different ways, just shows how versatile Max can be to any situation that he finds himself in, as well as the fact that he's in his prime right now. Nothing more needs to be said about Max Verstappen. He is brilliant, and if you could have a team of 2 Max Verstappens, it would be at the top of this list. But Liam Lawson is the next in line to put himself through the Max Verstappen teammate gauntlet that nobody seems to come out of looking very good. Lawson, even though he is a rookie this season, isn't really a rookie, having made 11 appearances in the last 2 seasons, and in those races, he definitely proved his ability in that RB car. Drives like Zandvoort, Austin, and Brazil show that he does have all the attributes that he needs to be successful in Formula 1. And I love the fact that he wasn't fazed by the battles that he had with Alonso and Perez last season, despite them being much more experienced drivers. However, going from a midfield team to a team that's dominated the majority of this regulation cycle, alongside the best driver out there, is going to be a step up. And of course, they're not as dominant as they were 2 seasons ago, for instance, so Liam will have to prove himself in and amongst those other drivers from the top 4 teams to make sure that this doesn't become another Verstappen versus Albon or Verstappen versus Gasly incident, whilst having the additional pressure of having to prove to the F1 community why he was picked over Yuki Tsunoda. As a driver pairing, of course Max drags up the overall ranking all by himself, but I do think that from the races that we've seen so far, Lawson should be able to hold his own just about, even if this is the highest ranked driver pair with a clear first and second driver. This one is a very interesting one. Williams were ranked as the 3rd best driver pairing by 25% of the votes, another 25% of you had them in 4th place, and 25% of you also put them as the 5th best driver pairing, so they clearly divide opinion, but they're also incredibly highly rated for a midfield to lower midfield team. If you told Williams fans who had to sit through the Latifi era that they would have the 4th best driver lineup in the sport in a few seasons' time, they would look at you like you were insane. But Williams now find themselves with 2 of the strongest drivers on the grid. Alex Albon has been the spearhead of the team as they try and get back into the mix under James Vowles, and has proven himself to be one of the most dependable midfield drivers. He did go through a sizable dip in form at the end of last year with a few crashes and a few races where he was outperformed by Franco Colapinto, but looking at his time in a Williams car overall, he has been very impressive and has been able to grab points fairly regularly. Then somehow, Williams have also been able to go from Logan Sargent in their second seat to a multiple race winner in Carlos Sainz. I'm still not 100% sure how they managed it, because Sainz at Ferrari has shown that he is more than capable of running with the best drivers in the top teams. And he put in some beautiful drives like Singapore 23 or Mexico last season, where he was just on another level. Even Leclerc admitted that he couldn't get anywhere close to Carlos that weekend. So Williams have themselves 2 very strong drivers who will be incredibly motivated. Alex to maintain his Williams #1 status against his first real test, and Carlos to prove to the big teams what they're missing. I can completely understand why this is seen as one of the fastest and most consistent driver pairings on the grid, and surely will push the team to climb up the constructor standings. If they can deliver a relatively decent competitive car, there is no reason why this driver lineup won't have at least one of this pair, if not both of them, in and around the point scoring places every weekend. The Mercedes team do have a Hamilton role to fill in 2025, whilst also still battling with the ridiculous inconsistency of their car. But in terms of their driver lineup, they were very, very close, and a few votes here or there could have easily swapped Mercedes into 4th place. However, you place them just below Williams in 5th. And I suppose they're in a similar spot to Red Bull, with each side of the garage just being a little lower down in the pecking order inside Formula One. George, knowing that Hamilton was leaving at the end of last season, did step up last year and showed how consistent he can be. He beat Lewis Hamilton in the standings despite a retirement at Silverstone and a disqualification in Spa, which were two of Mercedes' strongest races throughout the season. In fact, you could argue that George could and maybe should have won all 4 races that Mercedes won last year. His qualifying pace has always been one of his strongest areas, and his race pace, I feel like, is getting better. Maybe not still to Hamilton's level yet, but getting better nonetheless. Alongside him reducing the amount of silly race errors that he makes, they are still there, but they're happening less often each season, and 2025 is George's chance to really shine now that the shadow of Hamilton has been moved. As alongside George, we have what I feel like is the wild card of 2025 in Kimi Antonelli's unpredictable debut season. He is incredibly hyped up to be the next Max Verstappen. I even did that video a year ago or so. However, even Max Verstappen had a year in Red Bull's sister team to get used to the ups and downs of Formula One. Kimi is being thrown straight into a car that will be expected to at least a few times this season battle for race wins. He could, with all the extra testing that Mercedes have been conducting and simulator work that they've made him complete, be in a position where he comes in and flies. More realistically though, I do think he'll still be a little rough around the edges throughout his first season with Mercedes. He'll have some weekends where he looks like the real deal, and other weekends where the discussions about his fast track into Formula One are about it maybe being a little too fast. Which is why this Mercedes driver lineup could easily shoot up this tier list if Russell and Antonelli come good, but also it could just stay as the 5th best driver lineup for a little while. Outside of Williams, Haas were the highest rated midfield team in terms of their driver pairing, with 70% of the votes for Haas being spread across 5th, 6th and 7th place, which averaged out to a 6th place ranking. And I like your thinking, the double change at Haas makes this team feel like one to watch for next year. Esteban Ocon, in my opinion, is one of the more underrated drivers on the grid. Throughout his time in F1, he's had some very difficult teammates in Perez, Ricciardo, Alonso and Gasly, and whilst he hasn't exactly been best friends with any of those teammates, he has held his own and shown that on his day he can go toe-to-toe with them in equal machinery. Along with a few standout performances where he's won races and nabbed podiums in an Alpine that hasn't been worthy of anywhere close to those finishes. For example, in Brazil, even though Esteban did have a pretty bad end to the season last year, although there was a lot of talk around how he may have been given a worse car in the last 10 races or so because he was leaving the team at the end of the year, he still managed to put in a brilliant drive and finish P2 in torrential conditions. Then on the other side of the team, Oliver Bearman already has a great record of results in F1 from the small 3 pool of races that we've seen him compete in. He scored points in his race at Ferrari, then again in Baku for Haas, with the race in Brazil being the only arguable blemish to his career so far. Although even then, he was great during the sprint race, it was only once the rain came that he started to look like the rookie that he is, with a few spins and clumsy collisions, but he did still finish the race. Overall, it's a great safe pair of hands in Ocon, alongside one of the more exciting and semi-proven young talents joining the Formula One grid next year. And with Bearman in his few cameo performances, outright beating Nico Hülkenberg at times, who I thought was one of the best drivers on the grid last year, if Ollie can come in and be anywhere close to the level of Esteban straight away, this team could have one of their best seasons in a long time in 2025. Another double swap also slots into 7th place on this list, with Sauber massively upgrading their driver lineup going into 2025. I have nothing against Bottas and Joe, but at the same time, it was never a driver lineup that filled me with excitement. Whereas Nico Hülkenberg, who for me was clearly the best midfield driver last year, especially in qualifying, does get me excited. Of course, there are a lot of factors that go into making a team tick, but at the start of last year, almost everybody had Haas bottom of both championships. It was the performances from Nico that were a huge part of why Haas looked like they could be a competitive part of the midfield again. It's a big ask for Nico to do the same in this Sauber car again this year, but it will be interesting to see what kind of performances he can salvage, alongside Gabriel Bortoleto, who might just be the real deal. I know that Lawson and Bearman are being rated a little bit higher because we've seen them in F1 machinery before, but Bortoleto is a back-to-back Formula 3 and Formula 2 champion, and he won both of those championships in his rookie campaigns. He is lightning quick and will be so hungry to show what he can do whilst carrying the momentum momentum of winning everything that he enters. This driver pairing is incredible. The issue that the Sauber team will have, which may stop the 7th best driver lineup finishing anywhere close to 7th in the constructor standings, is the fact that the car was so bad in 2024. It got a little better right at the end of the season, but I'm still not sure 2025's car will be any quicker, with the team clearly focused on preparing for the Audi takeover in 2026. As much as I'm really excited about this new driver lineup, we might not see them on the broadcast very much next season. Another year, another Aston Martin driver lineup consisting of Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll, who you've put in 8th place on this list. Now, I had a look at the results from when I did a very similar thing to this last year, and Aston Martin was 7th. So they are slowly falling backwards by standing still, despite having a driver lineup that's not actually going to change anytime soon because Fernando Alonso is ageless and Lance Stroll, I think at times was actively trying to get fired last season and still didn't manage it. I don't really know how we can talk about this driver lineup in any different way and not say the same things over and over again. Fernando Alonso is a 2-time world champion who by many is seen as one of the best in the sport, if not the best of all time, and last year he finished 9th in the standings with nobody close to him, and it's not his fault that for the second half of the season, the car's pace dropped off a cliff and he ended up in races where he had literally nothing to fight for. Although yes, he is getting older, he doesn't seem to be getting that much slower and is definitely not the reason why nearly 15% of you had Aston Martin as the worst driver lineup on the grid. But Lance Stroll, to me anyway, seems to be getting worse each year. If Fernando had an indifferent second half to 2024, Lance had a just dreadful second half to 2024. There are 2 issues that I have with Lance Stroll. Firstly, that pay driver tag, which is incredibly hard to get rid of in Formula 1, especially when your dad owns the team, and until recently you had a never-ending contract, meaning that there was no jeopardy in your place on the grid. Lance just doesn't have to prove himself or battle for his place like all of the other midfield drivers on the grid do year in, year out. But the bigger issue that I have with Lance staying in that seat is despite having 7 years of experience in Formula 1, he seemingly lacks any kind of awareness. He never takes any responsibility for his poor performances or for his collisions with not just the barriers but other drivers on the grid. And he's been here long enough for everyone to see that he isn't getting any better. As much as having Alonso this far down in this ranking seems criminal, one man can only do so much. With all the money that Aston Martin are pumping into the team and the facilities ahead of 2026, surely this year is Stroll's last chance to prove himself. Which leaves us with 2 teams, and the team that you voted as being the 9th best team on the grid was Alpine. Of course, assuming that the Alpine driver lineup, at least for the start of the season, will be Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan. I think Pierre Gasly once again finished the season on great form last year, and Pierre showed that he can be a reliable point scorer for the team. If he keeps that up next season, maybe he can drag that Alpine car even further up the constructor standings towards Aston Martin, as most of you guys do see Pierre as at least on par with the other big midfield hitters like Hülkenberg, Albon and Ocon. With Esteban Ocon leaving the team for Haas, bringing in Jack Doohan to replace him does feel like a significant downgrade. Of all the rookies entering Formula 1 next season, there's definitely the least hype around Jack. And maybe that's because Alpine seem to have lined up his replacement before he's even had the chance to get behind the wheel of the 2025 Alpine car, but he also doesn't have the junior titles that the likes of Bortoleto and Antonelli have, or the amount of F1 experience that Lawson and Behrman have. He's in this weird middle ground. I know he finished 2nd in F3 and 3rd in F2, but that was also to 2 drivers that haven't made it into Formula 1 either. He's had a full season as a reserve driver last year to integrate himself into the team, but still there's just something missing, which makes me feel like Jack will only ever end up being an okay midfield driver at best, and he won't be anywhere close to Pierre Gasly next season. Of course, that does mean we're unlikely to see the 2 Alpines collide like we have done when Gasly and Ocon have been side by side over the last couple of years, which maybe is a tiny silver lining with this driver pairing feeling very one-sided. We'll have to wait and see. And all the way at the bottom of the pack and rounding out this video is the RB, Racing Bulls, VCarb, AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso driver lineup with 40% of the votes having them as the worst driver pairing on the grid. Tsunoda had a strong 2024, started the season brilliantly, which allowed him to capitalize on when the RB car was performing at its best compared to the rest of the field, gaining that contract extension for this season. But despite that, and almost everyone wanting to see Yuki get a shot alongside Verstappen, he was still shunned by the main Red Bull team. Of course, there must be a reason, even if it's as simple as the Honda links or his fiery temper or the fact that they just want to have at least one experienced driver at RB. Whatever it is, Tsunoda seems like he won't ever get that shot at Red Bull and also won't be at the sister Red Bull team for much longer. Then with Hadjar, it's weird because even though the title battle with Bortoleto went right down to the final race of the season, and obviously he outperformed Behrman and Antonelli last year in Formula 2, there just isn't the same excitement around him entering the Formula 1 grid. Maybe it's because it was his second season in Formula 2, but then it was also Behrman's second season in Formula 2 as well. I'm not too sure. It's hard for me to put my finger on why it doesn't feel like Hadjar is as exciting as all the other rookies, maybe outside of Jack Doohan. But both drivers do feel like they could be fast on their day. However, if there's one reason why you should follow this RB driver lineup next season, it's the insane radio messages we are set to hear from both sides of the garage. But what do you think? Do you agree with this list? You can still have your say in the comments down below or using the link in the description to this survey. And whilst you're down there, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and why not check out this video on Kimi Antonelli and why he might be the next Max Verstappen.